Good evening and Assalamu alaikum to this beautiful, beautiful day in Cape Town. For those of you who are logged on from all over the world, and I'm pleased to say that there are many, many people who have uh, logged on, and that's fantastic because this is such a very, very important topic. And sometimes it's relevant not only in Cape Town, but anywhere in the world. The Salt River Heritage Society was launched in 2018 to collate and preserve the history, the culture, the heritage of this very unique suburb. And it continues to host webinars on important topics that impacts on people across the Cape Peninsula. Gentrification in particular has had the impact of displacing residents and altering the look and feel of the area. Property prices instead have rocketed. And then many older homes, believe it or not, have actually been demolished. So today's topic, gentrification and affordable housing in Salt River, bears relevance to many, many people across the world. And today we're going to try and tackle some of the pertinent issues that relates to gentrification, both gentrification and perhaps even a nice definition of gentrification, because there's a much misunderstanding about gentrification, and then what we understand by affordable housing. So today's topic, therefore, deals with a large number of developments on either side of Salt River, which is on one end Observatory and the other end Woodstock, and then further up into Cape Town, besides the CBD, in a suburb called Bukab, which is one of the oldest residential areas in the country, if one be honest with oneself. So today we've got a fairly highly experienced panel will guide us through the minefield of issues, and particularly the medium to long-term impact of unchecked development. And then to explain what gentrification is, we're going to try and answer that, how it affects Salt River and its community, and then in fact also look at the possibility of a charter for development, a kind of guide for developers for the area. We'll try and touch on the housing crisis in South Africa, what is in fact affordable housing, and then, as I said earlier on, a short case study on the Bukab experience. Today's panelists are Anwar Omar. He's a deputy chairperson of the Salt River Heritage Society. He's born and bred in Salt River. Believe it or not, at a very young age, he produced the documentary that was called Salt River High, which is a high school in Salt River, 1976, and it's called The Untold Story. Anwar is a retired petroleum economist and is currently reading an MPhil in Heritage and the Built Environment at the University of Cape Town, with special focus on Salt River. His master's in philosophy dissertation is focusing on the intersection of heritage and gentrification in Salt River. Marco, on the other hand, is a project coordinator at DAG, that is Development Action Group. He's an urbanist who's worked extensively in various roles and spheres of government and community-based organizations. After studying town and regional planning, he worked as a city planner within the South African government, focusing on policy development and strategy in the transport and infrastructure sectors, and more recently, working with Cape Town's, City of Cape Town's Arts and Culture Department in managing the cultural spaces and program in its cultural facilities. Then you've got Osman Shabuddin, or Uthman Shabuddin. He is very, very well known as Usi to everyone and anyone. He has been around for a very, very long time, an activist of note, long-suffering person, guide for not only for the Bukab community, but we many, many people lean heavily on his experience and expertise when it comes to civic matters. And then a young man, Abu Dayan Peterson. Abu Dayan is an environmental science, Arabic and media studies student, also at the University of Cape Town, as well as an amateur researcher of Cape Malay history and heritage. The program for today is simple. We've got about an hour and a half. It's not a debate. We're going to be taken through presentations, deep diving into some of the key issues of gentrification and heritage by the panelists, and also I must remind viewers and listeners, if they are listeners who can't see us, that this will not be the first. There will be a series of these discussions over time. And so we've set aside about 1.5 hours. Without further ado, I'll ask Anwar to present us his talk for this evening. Anwar Omar.
Thank you, Shabuddin. Thanks for that introduction. Let me just try and share my presentation. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, the topic of my presentation is contextualizing gentrification in Salt River. And this is, as Shabuddin explained, this is the first of many such webinars. And this presentation of mine is just setting the scene for further discussion of this topic during this webinar, as well as future webinars that will be organized by the Salt River Heritage Society. The outline of my presentation, I'll start off with a bit of history on Salt River since 1860. I'll define gentrification. I'll take you through a bit of the phases of gentrification. I'll take you on a quick tour of Salt River to see what's physically happening in the area. And then I'll focus on two specific developments, the Albert Road and Foundry Road developments. I'll chat a bit about the developmental charter that Shabuddin touched on, briefly touch on cultural gentrification, and then come up with a few conclusions. Just want to try and get this out of the way. Yeah. So historically, there are three features that defines the urbanity of Salt River and its later evolutionary trajectory, and it's still being felt today. Firstly, it's the major directional routes in Salt River, the development of the railway network, and thirdly, the industrialization of the area. This is just a cartoon to show the various phases of urbanity. This in 1860, the directional routes was already there, and the area was basically developed subsequent to the railway line joining the southern suburbs, with Cape Town using Salt River as a junction between these directional routes. So the urbanization of Salt River, as I've said, can clearly be linked to the development of the railway network. The railway network was completed in 1864, and in 1866, the Salt River Railway Workshop became the largest and most important employer in the region, and much of the residential fabric, even as it stands today, was subsequently built to accommodate railway workers. Now, whilst the geometry of the suburb was determined by these major directional routes, the degree of urbanity was determined by the industrial fabric, much of which currently stand derelict and unsupported by local industry. And we'll see that as I go through my tour of Salt River. Between 1890 and 1910, there's been an intense period of urbanization with the establishment of many factories, and due to its proximity to the CBD, Salt River became the industrial heartland of the peninsula, largely occupied by working class residents. Many other service operations and industries were subsequently established in Salt River. These industries were later joined by larger manufacturing businesses, and then joined by the clothing industry with the establishment of Rexton Form in 1937, followed by other manufacturing operations. Let's go into the definition of gentrification, just to know what we're talking about. And this is just a stock standard definition of gentrification. Obviously, there's a lot of debate about this, but gentrification is the rehabilitation and transformation of derelict working class residential areas into middle-class residential and or commercial areas. I put derelict in inverted commas because obviously sometimes it's not derelict sites that are developed. This is normally precipitated by the appreciation of the relatively superior habitability of these older working class residential areas in proximity of the city over new suburbs on the outskirts of the city. Now, interestingly enough, Salt River reflects all the attributes that makes it vulnerable for gentrification. You'll see I bracketed off those first four, the low-income residents, renters, elderly, unemployed. And this was confirmed in a formal survey conducted by the Salt River Heritage Society in 2020, that a large proportion of residents in Salt River makes up this demographic. It's easy access to job centers, it's easy to public transport, increased urban congestion, and comparatively low housing values, although this is a dynamic issue that's changing considerably, and I'll touch on that as we go along. Now, something that's quite noteworthy is that Salt River has never been subjected to forced removals, which make the type of gentrification occurring in this area quite different to other areas such as the Waterkant, adjacent to Poorkaap, and Hallfield Village, in the southern suburbs. However, many of those who were forcibly removed during the Group Areas Act have settled in Salt River. And currently, you'll see when I take you on tour, in the next slides, the current wave of gentrification is largely focused on the fringes, on industrial and commercial sites that are derelict, vacant, and unsupported by economic conditions, but how it's slowly encroaching deeper and deeper into the residential area. This is just the phases of gentrification. I'll not go into much detail. The first phase, it's targeted private investment to rehabilitate residential units, the vacant, derelict, industrial, and other sites being developed. Then phase 2, an increased awareness of the neighborhood, its low-cost housing and other amenities, a displacement, a progressive displacement of poorer residents by middle-class residents, and then phase 3, a much more aggressive form of gentrification and development. We'll see how this fits into the picture in Salt River. Now, these phases of gentrification are obviously not linear and can occur simultaneously or in parallel, particularly in a suburb like Salt River, surrounded, as Sabudin pointed out, with neighborhoods like Woodstock and Observatory on either side, where the process of gentrification might be at a more advanced stage. In my personal view, in terms of the phases of gentrification, Salt River is at the tail end of the first phase, and I'll try and demonstrate that as we take the tour, and it's poised for much more aggressive process of gentrification, where existing lower income residents are progressively displaced by a higher proportion of middle class residents, and we'll see that coming out in the tour. We'll start the tour with this map. Yeah. Again, I've highlighted the major directional routes, the Albert Road, Victoria Road, Salt River Road, Lower Main Road, and so forth. We know that Salt River is a heritage protection overlaid zone. This is the orange bits here, and the rest of it is a proposed heritage protection overlaid zone. As you can see, these dots that I have, these are all developments on the fringes. Yeah, but I'll show that things are obviously encroaching much deeper into the residential area. Now, I'm not suggesting that these developments are all gentrifying developments. However, if you look at them together, they are creating the environment that is conducive to gentrification. Our tour will start in Chatham Road, that's here. In Chatham Road. I'll then skip Foundry and Albert Road. I'll take you directly to the Salt River Market Precinct, then to Salt River Road and onto the Biscuit Mill, and then we'll tour Victoria Road, where there's lots of major developments happening. So this is on the corner of Chatham and Lower Main Road. This is a new development just completed probably about a year ago, and you'll see how closely it abuts the fine grain residential area. Interestingly, you'll see there's a for sale sign on Butasali's house. This is a person that was born in Salt River. He's older than me, so he's probably close to 70 or early 70 years old, and his house is for sale, and one wonders why. Yeah, I think it's obviously either he's fed up with his privacy being encroached. You'll see, how these flats overlook his residence, or he's trying to chip into the perceived higher value, higher property values, that this opportunity creates. This is just another view, another streetscape view. If Omar Jakut is here, this was their house many, many years ago. The Jakut family grew up there. That's the same development, and that's Butasali's house over there. This is on the other corner, same development on Kipling Street corner, and you'll see again this development abutting the fine grain residential area as you go up Kipling Street. Opposite that, right opposite that, just above Barbara Boswell in Rochester Road, there's two developments. My mom many years ago had a little dressmaking shop called Offcut Selected. That building has subsequently been demolished, and you have these two high-rise flats currently being completed. We move then on to the Salt River Railway Institute and Market Precinct. Now, this is a very interesting site. This site is different to the others because it's owned by the city. And I think we need to differentiate between privately owned and publicly owned developments. This was the subject of a communique, a proposal a few years ago, where they wanted to combine these various urban. This is the earth under the bridge, now occupied by homeless informal settlements. That's the Railway Institute, that's the market area. And beyond the market area, you have the stables also occupied by homeless informal settlers. The Salt River Railway Institute, this building is one of the oldest buildings in the area. It's built in 1917. The Salt River Heritage Society has a particular interest in this particular building because this building is not only one of the oldest buildings, but it signifies the genesis of Salt River, as I've tried to articulate earlier in terms of the railway works. It's largely authentic, and we're trying to motivate that it be converted into a heritage center. This is another perspective of that same area down Voortrekker Road. This is from the bridge, the Voortrekker Road Bridge, and which was built in 1986. And this bridge effectively separated the market precinct from the residential area on the other side, almost sterilizing this area. As I've said earlier, the Railway Institute, we have a particular interest in it in terms of transforming it into a heritage center, because we see this as providing an opportunity to reintegrate the market railway area back into the residential area by linking it in terms of this heritage center. As we move along, this is the Salt River Circle in Salt River Road. And then this is the urban artisan apartment on the corner of Kent and Salt River Roads. Now, I haven't been able to get all the way of information. I'm busy with my thesis, and I'm obviously gathering information. But on this particular development, this was completed about a year ago. It's an 8-story apartment building, a 1-bedroom apartment. The rental is between 8,000 and 11,500 Rand. And the question is that affordable to Salt River residents? Who are they targeting? Now, I'll present the information where I have it as best I can. Biscuit Mill on the other side of the circle. This is the hallmark of gentrification as we all know it. This stands out like a sore thumb in Salt River. The Salt River residents are not benefiting from this, neither has it been integrated into the area. The most I can think that people are benefiting are the car jockeys, ushering cars on a Saturday and on a Sunday. But, really, this is the hallmark of gentrification in the area. Again, that's the Biscuit Mill. Then we move up to Victoria Road, Rextruform and the Kavala buildings. They're currently being developed into a commercial development, offices and other businesses. We have the heritage practitioner, Claire Abrams, doing the heritage impact assessment. She's been very sort of active in terms of engaging us as a heritage society, as well as the community, in trying to promote this project. This on the opposite side, this is Rextruform, built in 1948. I won't go into too much detail. This is the Upper East Side development. Now, this has been in existence for almost 10 years. It's a hotel resident. There's residential units in the building, as well as office space. You'll see there's development happening right in front of the building there. This is a new development that's currently ongoing. I took these pictures about a few weeks ago. By the way, all these pictures are my own. I physically went out and took pictures of the area. This is the brickworks where the brick field used to be, and you can see again targeting upmarket businesses catering for middle class tastes. So the question is, who are they targeting? This is an interesting development. You hardly see this, you hardly notice this. This is Queen's Park Studios. I only stumbled across it because I bought a lens from a lady, and she's resident in this. It's a factory space converted to a chic apartment. Again, middle class type apartments catering for middle class tastes. The Brickfield Park, again, targeting upmarket businesses catering for middle class tastes. It's not targeting Salt River residents at all. This is Durham Square Apartments, further on Victoria Road, on the corner of Durham Avenue and Victoria Road. I got a bit more information. A one-bedroom apartment, remember, and I'll get a bit more into that later. Sells for 1.3 million. Rentals starting at about 7,500 Rand a month. This development has been in existence for, I think, about a decade. This is just on the other corner where you have the International Hotel School and where Pals used to be. Further down Cecil Road, I haven't captured that, but on the corner of Swiss and Cecil Road, there's a couple of developments, and one of those abuts the residential area further down. Quite chic apartments there as well. And you can see it's almost as if it's not part of the Salt River area. I haven't got a picture of that, unfortunately. This is the Standard Bank and Duchess site. This is on the corner of Shelley and Victoria Roads. You can see something is happening there. We'll find out soon enough when they put their application into Balcom at the Heritage Western Cape. That's the Art Deco building there. The bank used to be where this vacant plot is. But surely there's something afoot there. This is the Monatic development. It's a huge monster of a development for student accommodation. Again, Claire Abrams, the heritage practitioner, is doing the heritage impact assessment. And again, she's been very engaging in terms of heritage issues with the Heritage Society as well as other residents in the area. That's again the Monatic development. It's huge. I mean, it will probably take shape in the next year or two. This is just a vacant site or a derelict site that I think will be developed, and snapped up by a developer. This is on the corner of Rochester and Victoria Road. This used to be a garage, and if you look at it from this perspective, you'll see what I mean. It's on that corner, Rochester Road, close to the school. Surely someone's eyeing that site for development. Just getting back to locating us, I'll now take us, I've covered all these developments on the fringes. I'll now focus more on the Foundry Road development and the Alberta Road development, deliberately for, to develop our charter. So this is the Foundry Road development. There was quite an historic building on here, what we all know as the Bobojan building. This building was demolished in the mid-80s. And the shop here on the corner much later, but there's now an approved development afoot. Now this didn't have to go through the heritage process because obviously it's a vacant plot. There's supposedly no heritage impact because they only look at the physical built environment, not at the intangible impact on the socio-economics and cultural aspects of a development. This is how close it is to the station. I'm taking this pic from the station across to the site. This is the development. I'm quite impressed with this development, I must add, because I think here the developers has really tried to make it affordable for people, as well as both in terms of its price, but also in terms of its configuration. It's a 4-story high building, so it's not that high. We've seen others that are 8 stories high. It contains 148 units. All of them are 2-bedroom units, and I'll share with you the other one where you'll see it's quite different. It's priced between 800 and 900,000, including VAT and legal fees, which I think is very competitive for a private development. Okay, there's a rent to buy option, 24-hour security complex. So I think this developer is really trying to pitch this development within the Salt River context. But that's just my personal opinion. This is just some sense as to what's happening in the market in terms of property prices. Over the past decade, property prices in Salt River has doubled. And over the last 15 years, it has trebled. So from 500,000 15 years ago, it's now 1.5 million for a normal 2-bedroom semi-detached in Salt River. This is the development that I was referring to, that I'm kind of trying to juxtapose with the one in Foundry Road. This was a proposed development that came across our desk last year that we resisted. It's between Addison Road on the right there, the Ackermans building, and then Burns Road on the left here. This was the proposed development, 8-story development, closely abutting the residential area on the back end, in Burns Road as well as Addison Road. It had 142 units, all of them 1-bedroom units. Remember the other one, all of them 2-bedroom units? This one, all of them 1-bedroom units. So who is this development targeting? Salt River residents? Definitely not, because according to our survey, there's at least a minimum of 4 individuals living in one residence. Surely those people can't occupy a 1-bedroom unit. It was marketed as affordable housing, but no price was given, right? The other development, remember, I said it's been between 800,000 and 900,000. Here, no price was given. And when we questioned the developer in terms of what the price was, both in terms of purchase price and rental, quickly they retracted and took the development off the table because they knew they were going to get into problems. As I said, it's abutting the fine grain residential, basically obliterating the residentials, the fine grain residential area at the back end, and it's caused significant shading and obscuring of the mountainscape. In fact, we did another scientific study to check the shading effect during different times of the day and different seasons. And this development, through shade right up to beyond Tennyson Street on the southern end, and Coleridge Road on the other side. Okay, so out of this, we tried as Salt River Heritage Society to come up with a development charter. Now, this is just the beginnings of it. So, this is a draft, this is a proposed, this is proposed development criteria, and we would like to invite all of you to put your heads together and help us with this, so that when a development happens in Salt River, we have clear guidance to a development. This is what the residents of Salt River wants to see. Firstly, a maximum of 4 stories. Yeah, obviously, depending where it is, if it's on the other end of Victoria Road, I don't think it matters whether it's more than 4 stories, because there's no residential area behind it. However, if it's in the midst of the residential area, 4 stories should be the maximum height. It has to be a minimum of 2-bedroom units, or largely 2-bedroom units, not totally 1-bedroom units, as we've seen in the Alberta development, because who in Salt River would want a 1-bedroom unit for their family? It should be affordable. Yeah, and Marco will speak to the affordability issue. And I've come up with a figure in terms of affordability, and this is just, once again, my personal take on things, and I've used the Foundry Road development as my proxy. Remember, they came up with 800 to 900,000. If a development is subsidized, it should be able to shave off about 1/3 of the purchase price, which takes us to about 500 to 750,000 rand per 2-bedroom unit. Now, this is not an exact science. I've used, obviously, the proxy as well as my own, intuition. And then Salt River residents should have first precedence preference to both the residential as well as the business premises in the area when it gets developed. Now, this is obviously happening on the fringes in terms of the built environment. However, gentrification goes beyond the built environment, right? And we've seen what happened last week. And I'm just introducing the topic here. I won't go into much detail on this. We've seen what's happening in the area over the last couple of weeks. There's a belief that the creative economy can lead the way in terms of economic regeneration, development, and tourism. However, there's a lot of questions that remains unresolved in my head and the residents of Salt River. You know, how much local involvement are there in these activities? Are the Salt River residents benefiting from these activities? If so, how much and how? Yeah, Salt River tour guides, there's tens of them in Salt River. Are they being given first preference to these so-called opportunities, economic opportunities in Salt River? And then finally, why is it that this street art is proliferating in a suburb like Salt River and not in other more affluent areas? And I mean, we obviously know the answer to that. And I just want to draw your attention, something that kind of struck me as quite strange is this this piece of art here. This is one building. I've kind of put it together as a collage, but this is one building, and you'll see that the whole house has been painted. The doors, the front door, the windows, everything. So what's happening here is that the residents are becoming part of the exhibit. Yeah, if you know what I'm saying, right? So if they step out of the front door, they're in this picture of so-called art. It's like, in my view, almost like viewing animals in a zoo, right? Anyway, that's as much I'll say about that. We'll have a special dedicated webinar on cultural gentrification and the proliferation of street art in Salt River. By way of conclusion, the displacement of Salt River residents as a result of gentrification is obviously of huge concern, especially in the context of apartheid spatial planning. Massive housing shortage for poorer residents, many of whom made their homes in Salt River during the apartheid period. A situation is now exacerbated by the process of gentrification along racial lines. Homelessness in Salt River is a huge issue, reflected by the several informal settlements under the bridge, at the station, at the stables, you know, the Sisugul operation, and just all over Salt River, in every corner, every street, you have this. And it is my view that the manner in which sites, public and private, are currently redeveloped will determine the trajectory of gentrification for the next few decades in Salt River. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. That's Anor Mar, excuse me, with his presentation. Very detailed, I think, and probably necessarily so, but on the long side. But I think it was important that we allow him to get through the presentation because of the content that he was presenting. Some stunning images, and I think it gives us a great perspective about the positives and the negatives of the kinds of developments happening within a very small kind of space within the city's boundaries. Next up, without wasting further time, because I'd love for us to entertain questions from participants and those of you logged on. If you can, we can unmute you later on and take questions from you, as long as they're relevant, obviously. That helps us to kind of formulate our thinking around the topic and the way forward for the next webinars that we are planning. Next up, Marco Morgan. Marco, let's go.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So I'm sort of coming on the end of the conclusion of Anwar's sort of presentation, speaking about why sort of housing relates to gentrification, and asking a question of particularly about this idea of housing crisis. And we've been speaking about this quite often. You know, it's a much debated issue around housing crisis and what we're facing in South Africa, and particularly in Cape Town. So, but before I get into the topic, I need to introduce my organization that I'm from. So I'm not speaking as an individual. Sorry, let me just get it.
Oh dear, we lost Marco.
Is he there?
Marco?
Sorry about that. Let me just get back to that. Okay, so essentially, I would want to speak to the organization that I'm from. I'm from Development Action Group, and for the purpose, I want to sort of separate what we mean by the issue of housing and how it relates in terms of states' policies, and then understand what is this extent of the crisis that we're in, and are we in the crisis? So I'm from the Development Action Group, and I found it quite significant. I recently joined the organization, and I noticed that it was sort of born in 1986. It's a year after I was born. And I think I found it very interesting that this organization was sort of focused, a few built environment practitioners focused on addressing issues of social, economic, and spatial transformation. And they've been doing this ever since. So from 1986, we're in 2021, and it sort of focuses much of its attention on supporting organizations, community-based organizations, in addressing and putting forward a pro-poor agenda. The other part that we need to speak to is what is the basis of housing, and sort of what is the sort of policy framework that allows that right state. And then we go back to our constitution, and it explicitly says that everyone has the right to have access to adequate housing, but also places that priority, or places the responsibility on state to provide provide housing with available resources to sort of realize this progressive realization of this right. And we've seen this sort of a number of policies sort of emanate from RDP to GEAR to ASKISA, sort of edging forward this idea of land reform. But it's really important for us to sort of understand what is this current housing market that we're sitting in. And we're sort of unpacked about what is affordable and what's not affordable, and what are the rent. And I think in Cape Town, it's very significant to sort of understand who can afford these properties. So I've put a little graph up, and it says that those that are earning 30,000 Rand as a household, 6.9% of the country that earn that, are generally sort of that supply is handled by the private sector, both in rental and sort of ownership. Those that are earning between 3,500 and 10,000 Rand a month are also then, so the supply is being given by the private sector, but driven with some sort of public sector support. But there's also an issue around sort of undersupply in respect of ownership. Then there's the next component, which is the focus of many of the housing policies, is that 46.9% that are earning 3,500 and less. And this focus is a public sector responsibility, and the supply is given by the public sector, but inadequate in scale to sort of meet the need. And where sort of state falls short in the sort of need for housing, this gap is filled by sort of informal settlements and then the backyarders around it. And I'll just outline a couple of policies that speak to this, that the comprehensive housing plan that sort of accelerates sort of the housing delivery as a key strategic for poverty alleviation, but also focusing and using housing as a provision as a major economic spin of a job creation strategy. And that sort of has also edged on to the breaking new ground, which we've seen a number of developments sort of reflecting its principles, is it looks at integrating subsidized rental and bonded housing, providing municipal engineering services sort of at a high level and being applied consistently throughout the township, providing sort of ancillary facilities such as schools and clinics and more, as well as commercial opportunities. And then the other sort of strategic housing policy is the National Housing Code. And it sets out that underlying policy principles, guidelines, and norms and standards which apply. And it also, it sort of, it lays out the programs that are sort of introduced since 1994 and updated. And then thinking through this housing program, because we often get stuck in the terms of social housing, and that as the only sort of response to the housing need. But what we see in these policies are an array of sort of programs that are put forward in these policies. And so I just want to kind of go through a few of them. There's the upgrading of informal settlements program, the integrated residential development program, the enhanced people's housing process, the emergency housing program, the social and economic facilities program, consolidation subsidies, individual subsidy program, social housing subsidy program, and also the institutional subsidy program. And these are a number of sort of mechanisms that the state sort of leads into dealing with the housing crisis. And then we have to ask the question: do we have a housing crisis? And I think the answer is quite clear. But the reasons why haven't adequately been unpacked. And so I've put a few on the slide just to kind of open up for some discussion. But we look at whether these housing programs are able to sort of deliver at scale with so many people living in sort of informal settlements. We look at the mismanagement sort of the rental stuff, rental housing, the inadequate sort of financing between state and private, that limited variety of housing instruments being implemented, evictions and relocations and what they mean for people. And another aspect is the very little community participation and facilitation. And then because of the price of land and materials, you find that a lot of these housing programs and housing projects are sort of pushed out to the periphery. So they're poorly located on the periphery. There's a limited also socioeconomic integrated and mixed development. And what we find is that there's no long-term strategy or vision in terms of how to deal with this housing crisis or housing backlog. But then understanding another term that's often gets thrown around is, what is that housing backlog? And I put up some figures. In 1994, it was 1.5 million houses that were in backlog. And that was growing at a rate of 178,000 units per year. The number of informal settlements are 1.4 million in 1996, and it's now 1.9 million in 2011. The cost that was attached to sort of dealing with this housing backlog, which was supposed to be sort of addressed by 2020, was 800 billion to eradicate the housing backlog. In Cape Town, the housing backlog was put at 350,000 in the 2017 Human Settlements Plan. And we're looking at that backlog, that informal settlements are increasing, and the number of backyarders and shacks are increasing. There's increasing overcrowding and sort of informal housing. And I'm throwing percentages around, but there's 27.4% that live in informal dwellings, and only 10% live in informal backyard structures. So this is the state that we have in terms of a crisis. It is a crisis. We haven't had an adequate response. There hasn't been a sense of urgency in dealing with this crisis. And the sort of the issue that we're dealing with now is COVID-19 has really exacerbated the issue. It's compounded the issue. So the impact of COVID-19 on housing and poverty and access to opportunities has yet to be determined, and will also require sort of a radical shift in the way we address it. Thank you for joining. I think I'm going to leave that open because I think that there's an opportunity for further discussion. We've discussed why, but I think that in the future seminars, it would be great to sort of speak into how we are start addressing these issues.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marco, for your presentation. I think it gives us a very good idea about the kind of contextual issues that we face as far as housing is concerned in the broader Cape Town. It really is a sad state of affairs that we can't fix the problem because of almost, I was going to use a very strong term here, but corruption is seeped into our psyche in a way that prevents us from doing what essentially we should be doing. But before I blabber on quite a bit more, I'd rather that Usman Shabuddin, who's been in the face of many of these issues for years and years, if I may add. For those of you who don't know him, he's the chairperson of the World Cup Residents Association for a very long time. A very active person, very progressive in the way he does things. Ozzy, it's your floor.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. I think one of the first things I want to do is congratulate the Salt River Heritage Society for putting this on. I think the challenge that we are facing, and I have to, basically my brief is to talk about the experiences that we have in Bo-Kaap as far as our gentrification is concerned. I just want to give a slight background to Bo-Kaap per se, because there's certain similarities that we have within Bo-Kaap that you have in Salt River, Woodstock, and all this, because there is a cross mix of population that we all grew up together in the Cape Town greater area. I think the first thing that we need to understand of Bo-Kaap, that it's one of the oldest residential areas in Cape Town per se. It has survived both colonial Dutch, colonial English, and partly apartheid too. But what we have seen over the period of time, that Bo-Kaap was very resilient to a certain extent, but it was declared a slum in the 1940s, where it's only in the late 1970s that the whole thing emerged that Bo-Kaap should be restored. And I think one of the things that we looked at, and I particularly as a young person, we looked at it from a political point of view, and not only from a social housing point of view. And we found out that people need to take their houses back, because most of Bo-Kaap was owned by the city council up till that time. And there was this first process of restitution in Bo-Kaap, where we forced the city to give their houses back to the very people that were staying in these houses and paying them rent, which was not the most difficult thing, but most difficult purely because most of these houses was in a very derelict state. And we had to find out some way or mechanism of actually helping each other to restore these houses. And that's how Bo-Kaap was restored between late 1970s till about 1990. If you look at any photos of Bo-Kaap in the 80s and the 70s, you won't actually recognize Bo-Kaap as what it is today. And that is not because of gentrification. And this is where we need to distinguish restoration to gentrification, where restoration is the very indigenous people that stayed in the house remains there, but they live under decent conditions. Where gentrification is actually the uprooting of that very people and new people move in. And I think that's the first thing that we learned about Bo-Kaap, that by giving these houses back to the very people that stay in it, we found that because they were proud of being owners, they actually helped each other to restore these houses. And that's the first thing. The second thing was the question of when that happened till about 1990, and most of these houses was done on the affordable platform. Whether they built new houses, which was the not landing as you go up Yusuf Drive, that was quite affordable at the time, that was 1990, or whether it was the derelict homes and open plots were sold for 1,000 Rand each in the 80s till about 1990. The challenge that we all sat with is that what we never foresaw is the question of gentrification. Now, gentrification actually started in Burqa in probably about 1990, 1989. You see, with the Relaxed Group Areas Act, where you could buy houses in different areas under close corporations and things like that. And then we start this started to creep into Burqa's fabric. We looked at it from a point of view of, so what are we going to do? Most of our people was empowered to buy these houses. And now there's people knocking on their doors, offering them money that they wouldn't see in their whole lifetime, put it that way. And in such doing too, it has a snowball effect. And here the city council plays a very devious role in this whole setup, as what we call gentrification, because they seem to be actually spurring it on because it's more rates for them, more income for them, less worries for them, put it that way. And then we saw our rates increase. Now in Burqa, our rates have increased since 1990, probably about 800%. And that is also with this abnormal valuation that is put to homes and houses and flats that we have, where people bought it for 1,000 rand, all of a sudden the same house is 3.5, 3.2 million rand. And of course, the rates of it is also the same, is per value. It's not per house itself. And I think that was the other challenge that we had from gentrification. But what we did succeed in Burqa is this. We raised a consciousness amongst our residents that Burqa is our home. And why Burqa is our home? By identifying certain heritage aspects of our area that is linked to us. And in Burqa, maybe it was a bit simpler than what it is in Salt River, but I don't believe so. I think Salt Rivers do have good icons there and monuments there that basically people can identify with. Even myself, growing up in Salt River in those struggle years, in Fenton Road and things like that, you could identify with the Salt River Market. You could identify with the Salt River Hall. You can identify with that church around the corner there in the main road where we had our bazaars and things like that. Now, this is the same things that we did in Burqa. We had to give our people something to actually hold on to believe that Burqa is our home. And this is where the process started, where I think Burqa must be the only one of the few areas today when you hear of because we're on this chat. So each time you see a private estate agent walking around Burqa, the chat goes a bit haywire and people start gathering and telling the person. I think that's the first, which is the first time where people tell people, the agent, to actually go where they don't want them to go, put it that way. Nicely. But I think the challenge comes to all of us. How do we prevent this gentrification from eroding our social base? And one of the things, a number of things that Burqa did achieve, and we have 14 developments pending in Burqa, 14, of which 2 is already gone. The other 12 is probably in hiding because they know the pressure that comes with it. We have fought many battles in court, and we fought many, many battles at Balcon and at Heritage Western Cape. I must just say my personal opinion to some process of Heritage Western Cape, sometimes I think Heritage Western Cape is captured to a point that they, on their panels, is the very people that is planning these houses, planning this, planning that. And I say that being the experience that I do have, and I'll say it in front of them. I think the challenge that we're sitting as civil society, that we need to form a cohesive group. And because we have one thing in common, the common thing is we love our city. And what is also in common, that we all live in overcrowding conditions. And what is also common is that our rates is increasing, whether it's in Burqa, Woodstock, or Salt River. And I think we need to find a solution amongst ourselves and say, what is our plan forward? Because the city itself is playing a political game of not allowing affordable houses within our area. No affordable homes have ever been built since 1990 in the city mall. So we are looking at the situation, even the Salt River market thing where they're supposed to build social housing. And I would like to ask Patricia from the Green Party what role she played in the destruction of our areas, because Patricia is the one that signed the 2015 bylaw that gives them the right, developers the right to not consult communities. And secondly, Patricia is the one that signed off and opposed us in court when we went to court on the block building at St. Monica's Home and at the Monster building in Rose Street. Patricia is the one that is now in the Green Party. And the challenge that we have is that you find there's no political will in order to bring back the working class to Cape Town. And this is our challenge. One of the biggest challenges that we have to counter gentrification is to bring more people to Cape Town. That is of working class and alleviate our overcrowding. Now in Salt River, for that matter, Salt River have a huge potential of all the derelict buildings that is standing opposite the Rexreform and all these places. It shouldn't be development as usual. These buildings were built by the sweat and tears of the working class in the garment workers industry. And these workers should be honored by actually proportioning certain amount of these buildings to low-cost housing within the city. And this is the other thing, the 80-20 type of scenario, where when people build something, you go into a negotiation and say, okay, fine, it's an 80-20, because the city always gives this as an option. And this you must check at the monetic site too. You should hold them accountable that 20% should be for affordable housing, not only for student housing. Student housing is something else, but there should be 20% for the overcrowding of Salt River for affordable housing. And I'm not talking about 800. I still say 800 is a lot of money. It should be subsidized to a point of 300 to 400 and even sometimes rental. And I think the challenge that we all sit with is that we all mustn't develop ourselves in silos. And I'm glad you people invited us. But I won't go much further other than to say that we have a job to do and that we can defeat gentrification in our areas, but we must do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, for your contribution. It also makes quite a few very pertinent points, and what I take away is that civil society needs to stand together and fight the scourge of gentrification. I think that's a very, very key point. For the sake of time, I will move on to Abu Dayan Peterson as quickly as possible. Abu Dayan, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Yeah, so I was told to speak about gentrification and how it impacts the youth, as well as, some localized history of gentrification, specifically in Cape Town. So, yeah, so if we look at the historical background of gentrification in Cape Town, well, South Africa, Cape Town more specifically, there are four main time periods. There's the Dutch colonial period, the British colonial period, the apartheid period, and then post 1994, the period of democracy, which is what we are currently in. So, during the Dutch period, there wasn't really, areas per se. It was farms, it was houses on farms that were meant for hiring out to workers and people living in the areas. But it's more in British colonial period where we see these areas and residentials emerging. And during that time, it's when they realized they had like this, like a clean party mindset where everything other than English-speaking Europeans is, lack of a better word, it's filthy to them. And this is when they also started closing the cemeteries throughout Cape Town, especially in town central, the Somerset Road cemeteries, which were Dutch Reformed cemeteries. It wasn't meant for the English European people. It was meant for the Dutch Afrikaans people, as well as the Malay cemeteries in Greenpoint and Buka. And it's also in this time period, before apartheid, when we start seeing these sentiments of, the non-white areas being seen as, it's slums, it's derelict buildings, it's unsanitary. I mean, I even saw something about the people in District 6 having venereal diseases. So, at that time, it was a very passive way of creating a mindset of people to move all the non-English white, non-English speaking non-whites out of Cape Town Central, right? And then from then we have the apartheid period where things start becoming more active. We have the Group Areas Act which came in where, it was a legal implementation of these sentiments that they had during the British time. And when, areas were actually declared, this is a European area, this is non-white, so on. And we had some areas which were declared, in Cape Town Central as a non-white area, such as the Buka, but it was declared specifically for Malay people. And that's only because they realized, well, not realized, but they thought that the Malays were solely the skilled workers and skilled artisans in the area, which is why they kept them around to the dressmakers, the builders, and so on. And once that ended, we had democracy, and the sentiments never left the people's minds. And this is when the developers come in and they start cleaning up the areas, replacing the old Victorian style with newer, more attractive style, the painting and so on in the areas. And through that, it invites upmarket, higher class people into the area purchasing these properties, which drive up the rates and force the others out onto peri-urban fringes where you find most of the lower working classes. So that's just some historical background on how it evolved from this colonial mindset to the gentrification we have today. And then, another issue, myself as a student, that I thought I should speak about is the student residence issue. And we know that within the Salt River, Woodstock Observatory area, there are many of these student residence buildings. And, it's just for the students. Many of them are university owned, where you have to belong to a specific university to get into these residences. And, I was thinking to myself, what do we do about it? This is specifically just for students. What about all the other people that were living in the area before, or other people that don't have any housing and desperately need housing? And this is only for students. And then I was speaking to Mr. Usman Shabuddin the other day, because I noticed there were a lot of there were many foreign, especially Arab students in the Buka, and I saw many of them were living with people, in their homes, interacting and so on. And many of them, they came from overseas to come and learn English here. And it's the same with also the residences, where many of them are foreign students or from, places outside of Cape Town where the culture is a little bit different. So, my idea is, how about there's some sort of integration between the students, the university, and the community, where the people in the community, they host these students. And, the students, they also get like a cultural experience of what it's like to live with, although it's the same country, with foreign people, because the culture is never exactly the same with what you grow up with. So there's that. And there's also the students, they learn how to live differently and live with other people. It teaches them skills in life. And regarding the actual residences, as Mr. Usman Shabuddin was saying, that about 20% of the new buildings coming up should be for affordable housing. How about you create it like that? A part for affordable housing and a part for the student residents and for the students. And in this way, the students can integrate into the community and just become one with the others, and they're not living alone on their own. Nobody around for them to engage with. And I was also speaking to some of the residences in Salt River, and even where the students are living, there is a major crime problem. So because the crime, it's bad for the students, but also bad for the community. So what if the universities engage with the community and form sort of a they can endorse, sponsor, encourage neighborhood watches to keep the crime off the streets. And in this way, it benefits the university because more students will be attracted to safer areas. It benefits the students because, they won't be in danger of, robberies, murder, and, we know what goes on. And it benefits the community because it makes the streets safer for them. So, through cooperation, both sides will be successful in the end. And while we're still on student residence, I felt that I had to speak about youth and gentrification. So because the youth are still young, they have no experience in life. They're being supported by their families or whoever supports them. They are independent on others. They don't have a direct impact by gentrification. They don't understand what goes on. So and housing is not a priority for them because they are either living in the residences or they're living with their families, living with granny, or wherever they are staying. The only way for them to realize is to start educating them, educate the youth about what is going on, educate them about the societies that we have here, that just because it looks fancy, it looks clean, it looks nice, it doesn't mean it's good, especially for the community. So, how about in high school, we have life orientation. We speak about these types of things in life orientation, or we include them in these discussions, in these debates, ask them, what do you think about gentrification in the area? Do you support it? Don't you support it? Tell us why you think so. Because at the end of the day, although it doesn't affect them, or they perceive that it doesn't affect them now because they are not buying houses, they're not involved in this. In the future, it will eventually affect them because it will affect their families. They are staying in these areas. And, as the rates go up, as these people are pushed out, forced out, they move towards, as I spoke about, peri-urban fringes, the outskirts of town, the outskirts of city, where we find a lot of the lower class labor, lower class working, lower middle class. And the students, obviously, the youth, they obviously move with their family out there. And it's very inconvenient. And that was the purpose of creating these fringes, so that it's not easy for the non-whites, back in apartheid, so that the Europeans could have the convenience during apartheid of travel or all these different institutions. And so the students or the youth, they will move with their families to these fringes. And at the end of the day, it will hinder their own education because they will be far from all the good institutions, the good schools, and so on. So, without telling them, without educating them, and without inviting them, they won't understand and won't fully realize that, they are actually the future of tomorrow. They will be the leaders of tomorrow, and they will suffer the results of what is happening today. So, to sum it up, if you think, what does residences, youth have to do with history? We have to look at the history and understand what happened, so that we can learn from our mistakes and educate the youth so that they can lead for tomorrow.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's Diane Peterson. Diane Peterson, one of our committee members at the Salt River Heritage Society. Thank you very much. I think that kind of wraps the individual presentations. We've got a few questions here, and I'm just going to throw it out there for whoever wants to tackle it. Who can talk to us about the rights of tenants vis-a-vis leasehold properties where the landlords obviously have a right to develop their property, and tenants are saying we ain't leaving. Who would like to talk about that? Marco? Legal consequences, Marco, of tenants insisting that they're sticking around because, where else do they go to, and the rights, therefore, of the property owners.
A legal perspective in this. Well, I think tenants have a particular right, and I think that's where that sort of rental tribunal comes into play, and what sort of allows them to sort of negotiate with the owners of the property. We've seen a number of cases where sort of owners of properties, particularly in Salt River, sort of infringing on and sort of tempting at the idea of eviction, particularly during the lockdown period, and tenants wanting to negotiate or wanting to engage in sort of mitigating those issues. And then that's finding the right sort of building the capacity to engage, but also finding the right mechanisms and also the platform of the rental tribunal to sort of mediate between those things.
Okay.
So I do think that there are the appropriate platforms to engage, but it's a matter of making people aware of what is available at their disposal.
Thank you. Anwar, just a question to you. The question is often asked, is it the function of local government, central government, provincial government for that matter, to provide housing, or is that an individual responsibility? How do you see it?
I think, of course, it's their responsibility. We have a historical trajectory in terms of spatial development. The situation as it is didn't just come about, willy-nilly. It was by design. So in much the same way that we have to unravel injustices of the past, inequities of the past, in the same way we have to address the housing issue and the spatial inequalities. So yes, the state, and more specifically the city, do have a responsibility in that regard.
Okay. There's another question that says, if the city is responsible for it, why is there a fight around the Sissigul housing estate which was the old Woodstock Hospital site? Why is the city adamant that they want to evict those who illegally occupied the structure? Usman, you might want to comment here.
Yeah, I think the base point is there that the city's argument that they have a waiting list and nobody's going to jump this waiting list. But I think the challenge that they are challenged with is the question of the huge backlog that we have in housing in the city, and the Sissigul thing is just but one of the sites that the city is actually finding themselves in hot water. The other one is Greenpoint, where the old nurses' hostel used to be, and a number of other sites that people have occupied. And I think one of the bigger challenges that we have with the city, they are bound by the Municipal Act and by government legislation because they get subsidies from national government to build houses. And I know in 2 years ago, they actually gave back some of the subsidies that they got for not using their subsidy to the fullest. So I think there's a clear problem that we have with our city council, which they don't understand the gravity, or they don't want to understand the gravity, and they want to keep the center of the city actually still gentrified to what it is, because most of their revenue in rates and value is being kept high to prevent other people from coming in. I just want to add this, with my experience in Salt River in accordance to Boerkaap, we were fortunate in Boerkaap that most of our homes were city council owned. In Salt River and Woodstock, why the battle is so fierce is the question that you find one landlord owning a whole street for that matter. And when he sells it, and here myself and the late Anwar Nagia goes back some time back, and I can mention the streets, Gympie, Page, all these streets, where he fearlessly fought these landlords as they evicted these people. So I think one of the things, the challenges that the Salt River people have and the Woodstock people have is how do they overcome that type of situation where residents can buy back those houses. And just a passing point for the Heritage Society. If you look there at Kudo Butchery, just cast your eyes on the side. I saw them about 2 months ago taking off the roof of one of those buildings on the side. Now, they normally take that off and they wait for winter to come. So that winter can actually soak in, the water can soak into those porous old bricks and make the building collapse, so that they don't deal with the Heritage Society like yourself. So you need to be vigilant on the developers' tricks and fancies, how they do things. And in order to be a step ahead, you need to report that immediately to the Heritage Council. So in order to make sure when they do make an application, they rectify what they have done.
Thank you, Osman. Here's an interesting question. The property owners in Salt River are saying that they have a right, if they have a good offer on their property, to sell the property to the highest bidder, irrespective of it being heritage property or whatever kind of condition is attached to it. How do Dayan, perhaps you want to address that?
Sorry, could you please repeat that last part? I didn't hear.
There are property owners who are saying they have a right to accept higher values for their properties because it's their property. Why should they not accept 2 million, 3 million rands for a property that they owe nothing on?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because I mean, you know, life is not easy. Obviously, you know, people struggle in life, and money is an easy way out to, you know. But I think it's a very, very difficult question.
Thank you. Think about it. I'll come back to you. Lutfi, I think we've got.
Could I possibly expand on that, Shabudin? Sorry. I mean, because that's a very valid question, and I think that one, I think it's making people aware about the implications of the sale of their property. So the implications of the sale of the property on the broader community and the culture of that community, and also the understanding, where do they go once they've sold their property? Are they going to the periphery of the city, and what is the cost of moving to the outskirts of the city, the transport, the lack of access to opportunities, implications of their family. So it's a matter of understanding what that value of the money is versus the implications
to the seller.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Lutfi, you've got some other participants who want to talk to us?
Yes, Yamin, you can go ahead.
Come on board. You have a question? Yamin?
He says he doesn't have a mic.
Is Brett Heron on?
Okay. Yeah, Brett must unmute himself.
Brett, if you can unmute yourself. Apologies for the pause. We're just waiting for Brett to unmute himself. Brett, you muted. Let's carry on whilst we are waiting for both Yamin and Brett to come on board. They had some interesting questions that they wanted to ask. The other question was that developers take big risks for big profits. Can you stop them from taking these risks, because they stand to lose big time if the development doesn't happen? Would like to take this one, Anwar?
Can I take that one?
You can take that one, no problem.
Go for it, Issy.
Yeah, I think one of the big, that has been an old argument, as old as time itself, where developers come in and say they are willing to spend this and their risk and things like that. And they, when you give them a certain uphill, then they want to create this impression that they did not know. There's an old saying in Latin, I can't say it in Latin, but I will say that there's something like buyer beware. I don't think people are willing, as particularly developers, are willing to come into areas and spend that millions of rands without not doing some of the homework that they're supposed to do. And they normally accuse societies or communities like ourselves of being obstructionists and anti-developers or anti-development. And I want to debunk that type of thing. Firstly, the type of, we've never been anti-development, never. But we always opposed the type of developments. Like Anwar just ran down some of the charter, the building charter of what they would think it should take place in Salt River, which is quite reasonable. I don't say anything unreasonable about it. So when we look at developments, we measure it against what we would say our values. How would it impact our life? How would it impact our heritage? How would it impact? And you must remember, it's not only a dead heritage of buildings. We have a living heritage that we do on a daily basis. There's the Adhan going off as a living heritage. There's a church bell ringing as a living heritage. There is choir singing as a living heritage. There's sports taking place on Blackpool, for that matter, is a living heritage. There's things that do happen in any areas, which is living heritage. So anything that impacts on that, for us, is not a good development. So we're not anti-development. We're anti-big profits and we're anti-gentrification. And I think the challenge that we're going forward is that must be made quite clear to any developer. Buyer beware. If you want to build in Salt River, you have to meet certain criteria. You want to build in Boerkaap, you have to meet certain criteria. And don't plead ignorance or anything else. So it's buyer beware. You build at your own risk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shabudin, just to add to what Uze has said, currently in my experience in terms of Heritage Western Cape, they're not taking into consideration the living heritage. Yeah, even though the Heritage Act mentions, living heritage, at Belcom, they only look at the physical built environment, and that's a major issue and a flaw in their approach. Because heritage is both tangible and intangible, but the intangible aspects of heritage is not taken into consideration at all.
Can I just add that to Anwar? I just want to say that we sat with the same type of problem than Boerkaap, where they only looked at the brick and mortar situation. With declaring Boerkaap a heritage area in many respects, we also actually declared certain things as living heritage to couple with it. So you can't speak about the masjid or mosque without speaking about the Adhan. You can't speak about the mosque without not speaking about what happens inside the mosque. You can't speak about the church without looking at the bells and looking at the congregation. So it's these things that should be built in to the heritage thing of Salt River for that matter. And people should take it a step further. Not only stop by the Heritage Western Cape, but take it to SARA, the South African Heritage Association. So you can basically put Salt River on a heritage map. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar.
Shabudin, can I add to that? I think it's quite important just to speak to
1 minute.
All right, so just to speak to also around Sisigo, and developers coming in, there's also a particular role of state to play in this. And what we've seen with this sort of push for eviction is that state is not looking at the interests of the community. We had a discussion where it was mentioned that many of the residents didn't want the eviction to move ahead, but the city had been pushing this. So you have to question, where is this drive coming to? What is the role of state? And how do you sort of bolster and build capacity of the broader community to engage and hold government, city, accountable to what their promises are?
Thanks, Malcolm. Malcolm, just a point that maybe I can ask you. As a professional town planner, my view has always been that the kind of colonial construct within the municipalities and for that matter, local government, generally speaking, is that of the colonial masters, and it's still persistent because it drives the roles that we have to follow because it's inherited. It's not an indigenous construct that we have designed for ourselves, taking into consideration much of the discussion here today. Your view?
I think this touches on a bit on my thesis and my writing, particularly around that negotiations that took place where sort of culture was sort of removed from the ideas of the RDP. That it was negotiated out of this, and by doing
sterile kind of application of the law, not so, without looking at culture, history, tradition, etc., etc.
And by doing so, and what Anwar was saying about this tangible and intangible, by doing so, you're removing that from the bill fabric, and sort of perpetuating that sort of colonial planning.
That's right. Excellent. Okay. So I think we at the point where perhaps we have about 30 seconds each for Anwar. Closing comments, Anwar.
Shabuddin, I had so much to say. I think this was the beginning of my thesis. Okay. I'm quite proud to say that I managed to initiate this opportunity based on the research that I'm doing. And as I said, this is was just contextualizing gender. But the intention of the Salt River Heritage Society is to drill much deeper into these issues. And I hope we've kind of created that platform to continue this discussion in a much more, in a much deeper manner. And I'll obviously continue with the research and present as I can, as my thesis unfolds. But thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Anwar. Let's move to Ozzy. Your closing comments. Marco, perhaps you can take it.
I think this is exciting conversations. It's really grassroots movements challenging the sort of status quo. I think this, for me, this is incredibly exciting, and this is exactly where DAG sort of plays the role of that support function. And I'm hoping to see more conversations on not just discussing this issue, but practically how do we take these things forward, the how. So I'm sure we're going to convene another webinar soon.
We certainly will. That's always going to be the plan, because this is not a kind of closed-in discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And in the next few webinars, we're going to talk about and look for solutions to this issue that we will provide to the powers that be. Perhaps, Dayan, you want to go? You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, my only closing remark is, I would just like more of the youth to engage in these discussions. And I'm thankful to you all for inviting me, as behalf of the youth to this. But there's so much experience being handed out in these discussions. It would really be great if there's more that could join and so that they can lead tomorrow.
That's a fantastic comment, Dayan. We will, as a member of the Salt River Heritage Society, will depend on you to draw in more of the younger people to take over, in fact, so that we can take our break, and we can see that we're getting old. I don't know about Anwar and Usi. Maybe you can add your little bit to the end.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I think the conversation is very stimulating, but I think what we need to do, this needs to be more than just a talk shop. I think we cannot waste time in having these webinars for academic purposes and things only. We need to team up with the Greater Cape Town. I think particularly of the new emerging District 6. I know the fact that we work very, very close with Observatory, with the chairman, the Starik, which are having major problems with Transnet ground and the Khoi history there at Lisbik River. I think the bigger challenge that we're sitting with is we must all collectively push for the return of the working class and the remaining of the working class within our city centre and not somewhere on the Cape Flats. And I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. There was one question one of the participants asked was, can I join the Salto Heritage Society? Of course you can. We've got membership. I think it's 1,000 rands per month. That's just it's free of charge. Please support us. The more hands on deck, the better for us as far as we're concerned. We encourage people to participate. It's not our organization. It's the organization for the wider community. It's the reason why it was established, and we certainly would encourage as many people to join as possible to kind of help and steer and guide this particular discussion. I feel in my duty, but didn't thank the panelists for the hard work and fantastic presentations. I am sure that the panelists who did put together slides would want to make it available, perhaps even on our Facebook page. We don't have a website yet, but certainly I'm sure that they would be prepared to share that, or personally make contact with them if you need more information. And then I must thank the chairperson of the organization, Salto Heritage Society, who steers and directs the discussions all the time, Dr. Yusuf Lalkan, our secretary, Lutfi Umar, who's put this webinar together on Zoom, Warda Rahim, who's always been supportive, so is Nadia Akadin, and Kulsum Pavyun, and Dr. Coney Benson, who's always in the background, guiding, advising, and supporting our work to the hilt. And the other ordinary members of the Salto Heritage Society, thank you to you, who always, when we need assistance, are there to support. I can't mention all of them, there are too many of them. Thank you very much. That's the end of today's program. Thank you to those of you who registered to attend this particular webinar. We certainly will be having quite a few more of these because of the importance of the topic, and the future ones, we will try and find solutions to the issue of both housing and the concept of gentrification, not only here in Cape Town, not only in South Africa, but broadly speaking, where the poorer are being pushed out by those who have, and those who don't have. We kind of want to find solutions for that particular issue. Thank you very much. That's the end. Good evening, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Shukran.